All right. Hey, Ruckus Makers. I am here with Seth Goldenberg, who's a designer, curator, and entrepreneur who harnesses the power of questioning to catalyze innovation and cultural change. He is the founder and CEO of Curiosity and Company, a one-of-a-kind bookstore, experience laboratory, and design ventures studio, and the creator of the Ideas Salons, invitational thought leader retreats that tackle the essential questions of our time. Seth is also author of Radical Curiosity. Here's a copy of his book right here. Okay, Radical Curiosity, Questioning Commonly Held Beliefs to Imagine Flourishing Futures, and that's available August 23rd. Seth, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I love the chief ruckus maker. This is good.
It's a nod of the cap to one of my heroes and mentors, Seth Godin, who's always talking about making a ruckus. And since day one, starting this podcast, that's been a flag that I've been waving, and the audience has really gravitated to that. So we're going to make a ruckus, I know, through this conversation. And there's a lot to talk about regarding you, but I actually want to start with your wife, if that's okay. And you told me that she created her own, a charter high school, right? And through just watching her build this thing, you learned a great deal from her experience, and you realized, right, that questioning was a big piece, I guess, of the school's success. So we'll start there, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me. I was just checking. I was making sure on my side, just real quick to identify with your chief ruckus maker. One of my heroes is Maurice Sendak.
Okay.
From Where the Wild Things Are. And of course, the great line is, "Let the wild rumpus begin." I wasn't sure if it was ruckus. I was just making sure. Was it ruckus or rumpus? It could have been
both.
Good to resist, right? Could be both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So so my wife, who is an amazing and fascinating education entrepreneur, she founded the first secondary charter school in the state of Rhode Island with a team, a co-founding team of incredible leadership women who are just ruckus makers of their own. And, I wound up partnering with her when I was at Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, the kind of Harvard of design schools, which brought me originally to Rhode Island, where I'm speaking to you today. And one of the things I learned from her is really how the Socratic method and the practice of essential questions became the operating system of their curriculum and many of their courses and pedagogical frameworks. And as she and I began our relationship, I felt like I was getting a second profession and education myself. And one of the things that connected us was this idea of questioning. And as a designer who has been schooled in design thinking, questioning is absolutely the central, if not the first, step in a kind of journey of design making. And for me, I always felt like it's a quick step that is immediately going to the next stages, as IDEO or McKinsey or all these practitioners who do design thinking work on. But I felt like it's kind of the penultimate step. So design is a practice of asking questions, but I didn't really know about this other kind of entire world of pedagogy as a practice of asking questions. So this is a marriage made in heaven, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it. So in questions is obviously, like you said, integral to how you show up and serve in the world. Certainly a foundation. But during our pre-chat, you mentioned something that set off my spidey sense. You said you love asking the thorniest and most radioactive questions. Can you dig in a bit and tell us, like, what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I call the book Radical Curiosity as a practice. I believe in my studio, we're inventing something that's after design thinking that we're calling radical curiosity as a kind of mindset and practice. And the term radical comes from the Latin root of radicalis, which really means to the roots of things. Radicalis, the root. And So it's not just passive curiosity. It's not just a kind of wandering. Radical curiosity is really about questioning the very assumptions of things, the very foundations where those legacy narratives are born, right? So it's not just a kind of responsiveness, meaning a call and response, like a dialogue, a question and answer. It's much more proactive and intentional to say, well, what do we really mean by health or ecology or justice? All the kind of human experience, human condition questions, those big things that make up the human experience. Those are the things that really are compelling to me and what radical curiosity is all about. Is I think we don't ask those harder questions enough. And this term of the radioactive or the thorny, it's almost like in much of society, we kind of avoid them. We kind of stay on the surface. It feels familiar and recognizable. But maybe if we need to be uncomfortable in order to really get kind of deep in the layers of the onion to really figure out what these models are based on, that might be the only place where we can really get to something more transformative.
Yeah. So, it sounds like you need to create the space, right, to be able to engage with those kind of questions. But when you're working with leaders, what else goes into setting up that environment, right? That you can wrestle with these really essential questions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think that I think we underestimate how much trust is required to do that heavy lifting, right?
Yeah.
And also how much trust has been fractured recently. And I mean recently at a kind of multi-decade scale. I mean, I think, there's so much talk and so much writing now about, returning back to normal post-pandemic. But I do think that the pandemic, it was an existential crisis that maybe made the kind of spelunking of getting deeper into these radical questions more accessible and more necessary. We finally are saying, well, what do we mean by work? Where do we work? What is the value of work? All these things are finally, I think, coming to the surface now. And I think trust has both been broken and trust needs to be deeply cultivated. So I think the social space, not just the literal space, but the social space of the intimacy of trust that is required to really open up these harder questions is the real thing.
So when you're working with leaders, now you're the expert, so correct me wherever I'm wrong. But I think you have these design studios and creativity labs. You talk about Ideas Salons, and you're wrestling with these thorny and radioactive questions. And now you just talked about this piece of trust, and maybe trust is fractured, so we have to rebuild it and make deposits into relationships and all this kind of stuff. But what does that look like for you, right? To set the stage now to build the trust so that we can get to the questions, right? But what's your approach?
Well, we deploy a variety of techniques, but it's also just a kind of way of life. I mean, I'm calling today from the island of Jamestown, and I live on an island as a design innovation guy that is not Manhattan, which is rare, right? We chose a different island, and we have really had the pleasure of hosting our clients and collaborators. When organizational leaders want to work with us, they often will come to our island, and we have a great saying. We say, slow down in order to speed up.
Yeah.
And this island is a very small farming, rural island, less than 4,000 people. And slowing down is a way to kind of methodically kind of move time at a different pace in order to make sure to get the questions right? Because the wrong question can do harm. An okay average question could create some value, but to really slow down and cultivate trust through a kind of pace, through a kind of retreat-like environment. I mean, America doesn't love its retreats on accident. Sometimes it's interesting to question, well, why do we leave the office to do strategic planning? Why do we leave our cubicle or our desk to think deeply? Well, I think there is something about the removal and being placed in nature, to slow down, to break bread. There's all kinds of rituals we deploy about food, about being in and near water, all these things. It's not on accident, right?
Right. I can relate. I'm coming off of a conference / retreat. One of my coaches, right? He lives sometimes in California and then half the year in Medellin, Colombia.
Beautiful.
So I don't know if you've been there, but that was my first time to Colombia. Wow, I'm in love. Like I might move there, type of thing. And we had 2 days of just inspiration, right? Amazing speakers. You had the relationships, the breaking of bread, like you're talking about. But then a key piece, talking about water. 2 days on the river, the Rio Verde, right? Whitewater rafting and camping in the rainforest. Like that broke open my heart, right, in my mind, in ways that it needed to happen. But I'm really resonating with what you're saying. Go ahead, tell us.
Well,
Tell us more.
it's interesting. No, I love what you're saying, because I think it sounds like whoever you're working with, your mentor, I mean, being on the river, whitewater rafting, and camping in the rainforest, I just wanted to kind of share that one of the building blocks described in the book Radical Curiosity is innovation as a practice of awe. And awe has become a new language that I've become really just entangled with. We know the sublime, we know the spectacle, we know the idea of being kind of overwhelmed with beauty, that we feel a sense of awe. But as a part of the book, I did some research about how science and psychology is catching up to awe, how we are now better able, in a kind of neuroscience sensibility, to describe what happens to us in awe. And one of the things we found was that, when you say, oh my gosh, that blows my mind, we say colloquially, right?
Yeah.
What that means in a psychology and a kind of neuroscience sense, it's almost like when we encounter awe, when we say it blows our mind, it's actually that a new version of the world, a new view of the world has entered our mind, and we have to accommodate and acquire this new idea to literally stretch and expand our previous understanding of the world. And I bet that whether we know it through science or just instinctually, we go on the rapid river, we go camping in the rainforest, the more we put ourselves both in slow space, slow time, but also in encounters of awe, really do enable us to reorder our mental models so that curiosity can flourish. So I love hearing what your example was.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Seth. And for the ruckus maker who's watching this video or listening to the podcast, I want you to write down these 2 questions and think about that are inspired by Seth. So how during this year are you going to slow down so that you could speed up? And you personally, right, as a leader, but also think about your organization and your staff. And then, this inspiring piece about awe, like, how are you going to innovate and engineer that for yourself and for your staff as well? So those are 2 things, I definitely want you to consider. So let's move on to Ideas Salons. I love the name and I want to know more. So, if I was to come to one of your Ideas Salons, like, tell us more. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, so my company was launched at an Ideas Salon. The very first thing I did when I started my business was I established my dream of the Thanksgiving table, the party, the convening that I always wanted to have. And it's really inspired by the history of French salons, right? This was a space for revolution where philosophers and business leaders and cultural artists of the day would come together and discuss the big questions of the moment and imagine and kind of activate the revolution to respond. And I felt like most conferences were very transactional. It's a format in our modern world that I feel is a bit tired. And so the Ideas Salon is a kind of an unscripted version of a conference. And so literally the experiment began as, if we had 3 days and 60 people and no sage on stage, no speaker, no talking head, no script, but we just said, let's identify the big questions of the day, debate them, and imagine ways forward. What would that look like? Right? And so it's an experience. It's a kind of 3-day dinner party that has lots of choreography, but it's kind of invisible to the guests because it's a very open format. And what we find is that if things get too scripted, there's not the raw, unexpected new thinking that is really required. So I would say what you would experience is almost more like the Blue Man Group kind of theatrical experience of ideation in a less scripted format that we find often yields the big ahas.
I'm going to have to press and push you a bit on this idea of being unscripted, though, Seth, because not necessarily leaders I support, but I guess I'm making a generalization, but leaders like control. All right.
I've heard that rumor. It's a rumor.
Yeah. And so here you are saying unscripted, right? In 3 days too. You know, this is a significant amount of time, I would say. So how do you approach that as a leader? And what tips would you have for the ruckus maker who's engaging with our conversation?
It's a great one. Yeah, look, it's not easy to be in a terrain that feels less known, less stable, less tangible. But we think this is what is required for curiosity, to kind of become comfortable not knowing, right? Answers have replaced questions. I mean, by the way, think about it. You talk about the leader. The current most mature terminal degree in business leadership is the MBA, Masters in Business Administration. The business leader today is conditioned to administer predetermined answers. And we believe that here in my studio, that real novel solutions that are required to fit the complexity of today requires less of a deployment of blueprints that already exist and a return to a kind of Socratic method of asking questions in spaces that are less certain. Like, what do we really mean by fill in the blank X? I mean, I love hearing about, there becomes this black and white, left or right, like fund or defund the police. This is not helpful. What is really interesting is when a community comes together and says, what is justice for us? Let's redefine justice, where communities in the post-George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement have begun to say, let's run a community cooperative discourse, a civic imagining to define what safety is, what justice is, what we want our community to look like. They're less scripted, they're less certain, they're less transactional. This is kind of what we do at salons. Sure, there are some boundaries, but it's not musical chairs. It's not stand up, sit down. Sometimes you have to discover even the question in order to know what journey you're on. And we think this is where really important things happen.
Yeah, these are important questions. What's justice? What is safety? Right. So I can only imagine how engaging these debates and conversations are at the salons. But another one that we should be thinking about is what is education, right? And you have a chapter in your book that talks about how education is too big to fail, but maybe it should. Right now, that sounds like a thorny assertion to me. and our ruckus makers would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we tend to think of our own individual experiences it's very difficult to work at system scale.
Mm.
But at a system scale, at a national scale, I believe that virtually every social system is facing an existential moment. And the very premise of the design of these social systems needs to be put under duress, under examination. And for me, education at a national scale, right? I mean, imagine, and I'm sure you encountered this with your viewers, your ruckus community, right? If you corner someone and ask them, do you really think the national system of public education is working? Mm-hmm. Very few people would just quickly say yes. Say, well, not really. Here's what I do, or this is what I hope, this is what I believe. So let's just imagine for a brief moment, give me a little rope to hang myself. We don't believe the grand experiment of public education is working, but speaking of safety and justice, we'll throw you into jail for not attending, called truancy, right? I mean, what has happened is, we tend to just kind of adopt legacy narratives, as I call them in the book. Mm-hmm. We're born into a series of histories that we were not a part of developing or deciding, right? And we come into this world, and apparently money exists. The ecosystem is at strain, and education is from 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. everywhere in America, and that's how things are. But I think, designers are wildly optimistic. For me, the question is, can we even have a conversation to say, what is education for? Yeah. Are we just assuming it has to be how it is? How willing, speaking of the term ruckus, what level of ruckus are we willing to embrace to consider the reboot button, the kind of refresh an operating system? It's like the Safari reboot on your computer should happen in every social system. We should entertain schools that don't look like anything they look like now. Mm-hmm. I'm tired of the micro, mini changes and, move this to the left and that to the right. We should entertain a much wider cacophony of experiments.
I could tell you're a design guy. That's wonderful. These are the type of things that keep me up at night, right? And I love to just ponder. So, and maybe I'd love to hear you riff on the idea of moving beyond the four walls of the classroom. Then, and what does it look like to create more authentic and real life experiences for our students? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's the famous quote, right? It was either it was Einstein, right? He said, "The only thing that gets in the way of my learning is my schooling." Yeah. Okay. I think for me, look, I've my wife's school that we began this conversation with, their thematic approach to their charter school is service learning, which I'm a big believer in. When you work in your community and contribute to your community as a way to learn interdisciplinary, project-based civic skills. I began at RISD, I founded an institute called the Center for Public Engagement. And it was very important for me, even at a collegiate level, at higher education level, to get artists and designers and digital media makers outside of their studio in the classroom and into the real world. And I think for me, I believe that life is not a schedule, life is not a curriculum, life is not run by school periods. Life is a collection of encounters. And I think I would love to imagine a school of the future that requires no walls, in which we are traveling and extending our radius of exposure by being with the world, right? Yeah, definitely. I really resonate with that. I've talked about a school that doesn't have walls and that kind of thing too, because the classroom's all around you, right? Mm. And there's learning experiences and ways that you can make a difference, make an impact, right? Outside of a school. So I'm loving this conversation, Seth. We're going to take a quick break just to get in a few messages from our sponsors. When we return, I'd love to ask you the same 3 questions I end with all my guests. Today's show is sponsored by the Harvard Certificate in School Management and Leadership. You can learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with this program. Get online professional development that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. You can apply today at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. The Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast is also brought to you by TeachFX. Research shows that the more students speak in class, the more they learn and the better they perform. TeachFX has helped hundreds of schools increase their student engagement by visualizing for teachers what portions of class are teacher talk time versus student talk time. So learn more at teachfx.com. And finally, today's show is proudly sponsored by Organized Binder, a program which gives students daily exposure to goal setting, reflective learning, time and task management, study strategies, organizational skills, and more. Organized Binder's color-coded system is implemented by the teacher through parallel process with students, helping them create a predictable and dependable classroom routine. You can learn more and improve your students' executive functioning at organizedbinder.com. And so we're back with Seth Goldenberg. He wrote this wonderful book. I have an advanced copy, but it's available August 23rd, Radical Curiosity. So pick that up everywhere books are sold. By the way, side note, I loved seeing you like nod along as I was doing the sponsor reads. I found that like super encouraging. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was intentional or not, but thank you.
No, I've not been as intimately aware as some of those offerings and services. So it's interesting to hear what you and your community are connected to. It's exciting.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So I can't wait to ask you these questions. I ask all my guests, but all the answers are obviously as diverse and unique as the guests that I speak with. And so, Seth, if you could put a message on all school marquees around the world, but just for a day, what would your message read?
It's like the marketing billboard agency of record of all of the education sector, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I can't resist. I mean, Radical Curiosity, the subtitle is Question Commonly Held Beliefs to Imagine Flourishing Futures, right? And I think, look, I just believe that in order for people to retain their voice, their agency, and authentically work to co-author the future, they need to question everything. And so I would just make 2 words: question everything, period.
Yeah. And listen, ruckus makers, pick up Seth's book because this is a part of our leadership presence, right? As a ruckus maker, we are questioning and challenging the status quo and tradition and commonly held beliefs all the time. You're going to love Radical Curiosity. So definitely pick that up. All right, Seth, you're building a dream school, right? From the ground up. You're not limited by anything. Your only limitation, I guess, is actually your imagination. So how would Seth build his dream school? And what would be the 3 guiding principles of the school?
The 3 guiding. It's more complex. We're in full mission architecture now. I see. Okay. Well, it's for me. I mean, we started to touch on this momentarily ago, but I think it's less about a building or a place than a kind of pedagogical entry point, if you will. And I think that the world today has so many challenges, but it's like a wildly exciting time to be alive. We have more capacity, more computing power in our pockets, in our phones, than most Hollywood studios had, at the mid-century. We almost underestimate the pure abilities surrounding us, right? It's a renaissance of possibilities. And so if we took every major question that is a part of public life, we talk about it here in our studio. How will we live, learn, work, play, and sustain ourselves in the next century? I think schools are the best environments to learn by doing, but as a kind of action-based research to put in the hands of young people that inquiry. What if we asked 1 million 12-year-olds, what should health look like? How should what should learning look like? I think schools should be designed as giant research laboratories where young people get to invent the future. Right? I mean, who are we to say that what has worked for our generation should work for their generation? Right? I mean, that is, Hannah Arendt has this great quote about renewal. And do we care for our young people enough to enable them to make their own choices? I'm ad-libbing, of course, right?
Right.
But to me, that would mean, 3 things. It would be school. It's almost as though all fixed knowledge, all pre-existing knowledge is now available at the tap of our fingers because of technology. So the real act of learning, maybe guiding principle number 1, is that learning should be focused on the invention of new knowledge. Right?
Yeah.
If pre-existing knowledge is transactional, sure, we need to contextualize. We need to figure out the relationships in order for that transactional knowledge to become alive. But the real pursuit of learning is the active invention of new knowledge. So that would be number 1. Number 2, I would say, if that's the case, I have this dangerous idea, maybe because of your audience, this may not resonate, but hear me out.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if we need teachers in the way that we've previously conceived of them. What if teachers were more like journey partners and concierges and facilitators, where they were available to help contextualize, to help form relational knowledge, but they really are almost like venture capital entrepreneurial investors in a young generation figuring it out. Like I think teachers need to get out of the way and become guiding travel partners. Now that sounds very conceptual, and probably the best teachers are saying, well, that is what I do. I
was going to say, I was thinking that's what I did, right?
Yeah. So, but imagine if at scale, I don't know, you might know the data, but let's say America has 500,000 teachers, 1 million teachers, whatever. If we reimagined the national learning ecosystem as 1 million travel guides, imagine where we could go.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be number 2. So I would say number 3, that means that actually the location doesn't matter. The question matters. The issue matters. Right? If we wanted to reimagine the future of housing, maybe rather than spending our money here on this or that, maybe they need to go to Bali to look at how bamboo is being used to make housing. I mean, travel and the global sheer range of diversity that is available to the wisdom of pre-existing knowledge in order to build upon that for new knowledge, I think is wildly underestimated. So I think the third for me is, it's not just diversity and inclusion because of a kind of language or buzz term. I think in education and learning, diversity is, there is an extraordinary universe of cultural knowledge that we have accidentally written out of the curriculum that may be the reason and the last new frontier to unlock and connect the sciences and humanities in ways that we have not been able to yet.
Brilliant. Well, Seth, we covered a lot of ground on today's conversation. If there was one thing,
travel partner, you're fulfilling my dream of a future teacher, my friend.
That's what I try to do. So thank you very much. And of everything we spoke about today, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
I think to ask for more. I think things are a little quiet out there. We're facing so much right now. It feels like everything is changing, and I think we need to ask for more. Right? We can ask more of our leaders. We can ask more of our communities. We can ask more of our businesses. I just think we need to really dial up the expectations. Utopia is still worth fighting for. Let's just say that.